front and back stage. In a theatre, you have the curtain, and when the curtain opens, you see the play going on. And that is the stage of life which Shakespeare and others have so brilliantly illuminated. That's the front stage. That's what's presented to the audience. Before the players come on, behind the scenes, in the dressing rooms and waiting rooms, there is the backstage, which is entirely different. The costumes are taken off. The usual procedures of normal life continue. And that idea of the opposition was taken by the American anthropologist, sociologist Irving Goffman to develop a theory of how, when we examine social life and we pursue subjects like anthropology and sociology, we need to be aware of that contrast and to use different tools and techniques to study it. And above all, as many anthropologists would think, we need to go behind the stage. It's related to Goffman's work on the presentation of the self in everyday life, that people are actors, that they present themselves to others, and we can be taken in by those presentations and that drama, but we need to go behind it and find what the motives and normal life are. And that is indeed a very helpful concept. It was applied in a Himalayan community, and there the anthropologist looked at the ways in which, as they walked down the street, as they went into people's homes, as they got to know how the formal workings of the society were. This was a caste society. It was a study by Gerald Berryman, Hindus of the Himalayas, which starts with a preface on this concept. And you see one world. But then when you go behind, and it happened to him by accident, or brought home to him because his chief informant, who was an upper caste person, left him, and he'd seen one world presented by this upper caste informant, and then another informant came who was lower caste, and he saw another world. So he realized that the world, even the public worlds he was seeing, let alone the informal backstage, were very different. Now, I've increasingly enjoyed that contrast. When you're an anthropologist, say in a Himalayan community, you can watch a great deal of public life. You can watch the rituals, you can watch people going out to cut fodder, you can watch the marriages, you can sit around in the evenings, and you see one world, and it's a perfectly real world, and people are performing to a certain extent, as we do through our lives. But if you get to know one or two individuals really well, and if you spend your evenings with a particular family who you get absorbed into, you begin to go into the backstage. I remember the shock in that village when, after visiting half a dozen or a dozen times, an old man finally trusted us, and he took us into the backstage of that community and told us about the real underworld of relationships and castes and everything else in the village. And it was a different world. Everyone knew it, or most people knew it, but they wouldn't talk about it, and we hadn't been allowed into that level. Now, one of the interesting things about that concept is that now the contrast between the front and the backstage in normal life has suddenly been liquidated almost. When I was being brought up, you saw the Queen giving her annual Christmas speech, and that was about it. You might occasionally see her in the distance on a newsreel. But now, thanks to above all, obviously social media, but also television and a new kind of journalism, the backstage of the royal family, for example, or any other celebrity. The House of Commons is televised, and we hear about the private behaviour of members of Parliament. And so you see the backstage of anyone, any celebrity in the limelight, and any other celebrity. And individuals themselves reveal the backstage in a extraordinarily innocent way, I'm told, on Facebook and other social media. So the contrast and the whole idea of privacy is more or less eroded. If it isn't other people, it's the state who know about the backstage of our lives. And this is something which we have to be very aware of, maybe deplore, maybe applaud. And the last thing to say is that for some reason, I think largely to do with my mother's attitude towards front and backstage, I've been, from very early on in my life, very open and candid about myself. I am not as protective of my privacy or my own views, and the very fact that I'm giving this talk and other talks shows this. My writings are, even academic ones, are quite autobiographical, and for a long time that was rather unusual. I would reveal a good deal of myself, and I do this in social relationships with people. I'm quite unguarded, and so I collapse the front and the backstage to a considerable extent, far more, for instance, than my wife Sarah, who is much more a private person. Whether this is good or bad, I don't know, but it is a feature of my character, and it's all part of this very interesting discussion about front stage and backstage.